crowd, so I think there will be a lot of asking questions and stuff. So welcome to creating a successful webcomic. My name is Beatrice Valenzuela. I'm a reporter. I'm a local reporter here with the San Bernardino Sun, but I'm also a contributor, bless you, a contributor to a Latino nerd website called Café con Leche Nerds. So you guys are all here, I'm assuming, because you are fans of these gentlemen, and also possibly because you're interested in making your own webcomics and learning a few tricks. So let's go ahead and start and have each of you introduce yourselves and how you got into webcomics specifically. What brought you to that particular medium?
My name is Chris Moreno. I was the artist and co-creator of a webcomic called Frat, which you can find at superfrat.com. I got into webcomics because my co-creator on the strip, Tony DiGirolamo, was someone I worked with in print comics for a number of years. And we just liked working together. And we did a lot of fantasy conventions, like fantasy and gaming conventions. And through those, we met a ton of people that were doing webcomics. And it was sort of like the very early days of webcomics. Yeah, we just met a lot of creators that were doing it, and some that were thriving. And it was also at the time when print was still kind of pricey to do independently. So it seemed like a great way to sort of just continue working on comics and getting stuff out there with, kind of lower overhead and more exposure.
My name is Wagner. I do Dot Problems, my webcomic. I went to the Hubert School for comics, and that led to actually after that a day job in the video game industry. So kind of got away from comics and illustration in that format. Just over time, just really wanted to get back into it. And like you were saying, webcomics was kind of coming up. I waited a little too long. I waited till after a lot of webcomics were already out there, but that's one of the ways I wanted to just get my ideas and my concepts out.
Oh, can you hear me? I'm Evan Cagle. My comic is Tropic, and like you, my day job is video games, and I got into webcomics because I was looking for sort of a new way to tell stories using the digital media that hadn't really been done yet. So Tropic is sort of a choose your own adventure, but it's on a mass scale. So people vote on the direction that the story goes, and that was something that print comics couldn't really do. I mean, obviously you can either choose your own adventure in print, but to have it open to tons of people is not impossible. So that was really sort of my impetus, was looking for a new way to tell stories.
And I mean, if you don't mind, could you tell us a little bit about that? Because that must be so empowering as a creator to be able to have that, instant feedback from people saying, I want my character to do this, which is, in a sense, what you can do in gaming as well. You decide which way to go. So.
Yeah, it's sort of like gaming in slow motion. Like you make choices, but they're not immediate choices. You have to wait for me to catch up with your choice. But yeah, empowering, terrifying, because I had to map out the story and every possible choice beforehand, so that because it released twice weekly, and each time it released, it had a choice, and so I had to know where those branches were going before anybody else got there. And some days was really it was really sketchy whether or not I was actually going to meet my deadline, because people would. I ran a lot of tests before I went live with it, so I had a pretty good idea of which way the tide was going to go, and there were a few hairpins where people just completely threw me, chose the thing I didn't think anybody was going to choose, and suddenly I had to draw it, and I had not planned for it, and I was like, all right, well, I've got a day to come up with 3 pages of choice. So,
And was it sort of like the majority of the votes, that's the way it went, or each individual person could choose the way it went?
No, so everyone voted. The whole thing ran on Twitter as sort of an experiment, and Twitter specifically because of its voting capabilities. Like there is no other reason why Twitter is the best platform to do that on. There's so many better ways to do it, and but so people would vote on the day when the thing came out. We would cut off voting the day before, so if anything had to be done last minute, I could get to it. I'd have at least a day to get to it. But there were some dead heats in there where it was like 49-51, 50-50. I mean, like it was really hard on those days because I just have to crank out 3 days in 12 hours.
Right. Well, one similar thread that I see between all three of you is you have some connection to gaming industry. You two on the end, you're currently working there, but you were saying you worked in print and in going to some fantasy and gaming conventions. Someone brought you into it. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that. Why webcomics makes sense for someone who's in gaming.
I mean, I think for me it's more like sort of like what Evan was talking about, the sort of immediacy of it, and then like you had mentioned like the immediacy of the feedback.
Yeah.
I think also like a lot of the webcomics creators that we hung out with at a lot of those gaming shows, a lot of the strips that they did had a very strong gaming background. So I don't know if you guys read Penny Arcade, like a lot of that was born out of two guys that played video games, and it sort of like branched off from there. I think it's just sort of like a commonality in it. I think primarily for us it was more the idea that webcomics is sort of technologically influenced. So I think a lot of people that work in games sort of get into it because it's all part of that sort of zeitgeist of technology.
And the boundaries are sort of blurry now.
Yes.
It's like now that the stuff that used to be firmly subculture is now just culture. It's now just pop culture. Like they're really, you don't have the distinctions anymore between like people who like board games and people who like role-playing games and people who like video games and people who read comic books. It's like everybody lives under the same sun.
Yeah.
So
And also
it
there's
would be more surprising if there were not that impactful.
Sure. And there's such a range of subject matter with webcomics. I think that was originally what also attracted us to doing it is, for ours, ours is like an Animal House comic strip, like with superpowers. So getting an idea like that to like a Marvel or a DC or an Image, at the time we did it was harder.
When did you start yours?
Gosh, I want to say it was like 2003. 2005, like around that
So
time.
late to the game.
Oh, yeah, as well. But
When did everyone else get into it? I know you said it was later.
This June will be 10 years.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I started in
2009?
2009, in June, and it was, I was like, I think it's imposter syndrome. I was like, I don't want to put this stuff out there. I don't want anyone to look at it.
yeah,
It's not ready yet. It's to this day, it's not ready
right.
yet.
But you put it on the internet.
But I do it, and because I'm like, screw it, I'm gonna do it, and if you don't like it, cool, but maybe you do, and I just want to keep going, and so that's kind of my impetus for doing it.
Mine came out in October.
Nice.
So,
Really late to the game.
so October of last year? Oh, that's right, yes, I did see that. So that's super new,
Yeah.
super fresh like that. I find it funny that you say that, it's not ready, so I'm gonna put it on the internet, but there is this sort of sense of, I'm gonna put it out there, there's so much stuff out there, maybe somebody won't see it, and I'll have a little bit of time to tinker with it. Why don't you tell me a little bit about the evolution, because the first time you put it out, it was so scary, and the feedback and how it's grown over the last decade.
Yeah, I think it's just, at first, I was just super nervous. I put stuff out there, and I really wouldn't promote it a lot. I just kind of put it on the site, my friends, my Facebook friends, and be like, hey, check it out, type of thing. But then over the course of time, mine's very pop culture based. So it would, whatever events are happening in TV media, I would kind of make, fart jokes about for the most part. And I just kind of doing it constantly, week after week, or however I updated it, just helped me, I guess, build more confidence, even if I wasn't getting feedback. It just for myself, just putting it out there just to see what I could do, and I like that process.
Do you still feel like an imposter?
But yeah,
Because my next question was going to be, at what point did you stop doing it?
No, every time I'll draw something and be like, oh, I love that, and then I'll see something else and be like, ooh, maybe I should have changed it, or maybe I should do. I think that's just part of being an artist. You always want to get better, and I don't know if you're ever going to be at that level where you think, okay, I'm good now. Like, I can stop. I can just do what I want to do.
Knowing as many artists as I've known, I don't know anyone that says, okay, I'm good, I'm done. You know, there's just not that complacency
There's got to be
with
somebody
artists.
out there.
who says,
One
like,
guy.
I'm the guy, I'm done.
Somebody thinks that-
Someone is like, no, I'm
Yeah.
good.
And what are some of the benefits, or what was so attractive about webcomics over print? I mean, obviously there's going to be the price, the accessibility, you could have an idea and you don't have to wait for the big two or even an independent to say, yeah, let's do it. You know, for each of you, what was it that for you?
I mean, I think for me, it was format and subject matter. So, you know, being able to tell stories of any length and about whatever you want. Styles too. I mean, I work in animation now, but at the time I was in print comics, like, you know, cartoony styles were sort of not in vogue. Like, people were really pushing a lot of like heavy realism and stuff. And, you know, as realistically as I could draw things, you're still getting notes that like, oh, this is still looking too cartoony. Whereas, you know, a lot of the friends I had in webcomics, like my friend James Hatton had a webcomic called In His Likeness, and it was about God and the devil having these sort of philosophical arguments. But God is like a period, and then the devil is a red period with horns. You know what I mean? Like, that was it. It's all just, you know, two dots in white space. And
Very good luck getting that to print.
that, yeah, but at the same time, his webcomic was thriving. You know, it's you know, Pete Abrams was somebody that we sort of hung out with in those early days too, and he started doing his webcomic Sluggy Freelance as a subscription-based webcomic in like the early '90s, like mid '90s. He was like the sort of, you know, early adopter of it, and you know, he was a guy that you know would get his sort of rejection letters from Marvel and DC. That was his sort of drive to sort of do it, and you know, now it's sort of a little sort of mini empire that he's got of subscription-based comics and all these other things. He managed to sort of build it for himself, and so I think that was sort of the thing that's really attractive about webcomics, is there really is no right or wrong way to do it in the way that some of these other sort of more established you know, sort of media styles and industries sort of have their little rules and their gatekeepers and stuff.
There's like the freedom to succeed or fail exactly how you want to.
Yeah.
And for you, Dave, is that also what was attractive to you?
Yeah, I mean,
about it?
it's funny because I went to school with Pete Abrams.
Oh, you did?
We went to Cooper together,
That's
same
cool.
year, yeah.
Yeah.
We actually worked together in the first video game job I had as well.
Nice.
So yeah, and then I found him later, you know,
Yeah.
doing the webcomics. Like, wow, and like I didn't realize he was that far into it. Like,
Yeah.
I should have hit him up for advice. So
Yeah.
if you know anybody, if you're trying to get into it, you know somebody doing it, ask them tons of questions. It helps.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's kind of the freedom is what, you know, really brought me to it. Because yeah, again, who's gonna, you know, you look at something like Cyanide and Happiness, and like, you know, you think a big comic company would put out a whole issue like just of that? Like, probably not.
Yeah.
I mean, now you can buy the, you know, the nice trades and stuff, and it's awesome.
Yep.
So I like that.
Yeah, you're starting to see a lot more people come to them, so there is some of that crossover. Is that something that you guys would like to aspire to? Maybe have something in print, maybe some of you have already tried that? Is that something that you might be looking forward to?
I mean, for me, I've always jumped back and forth. So I mean, I just had a nonfiction book about professional wrestling come out from 10 Speed Press. I had that come out in October. I don't feel like you only work in the sort of one media, but I think for me it's always more about like what the project sort of requires. You know, that even comes down to the style that I draw something in. It really is about like what the story is. So I sort of look at it more like that.
I've self-published some of my own work, but yeah, again, like you said, I've switched up, working on like some children's type books. So it's like a different look and a different style. So it's different than my webcomic. But yeah, I do like the crossover between the two. I don't know if I would actually continue printing my stuff, my webcomic. I think it works best online.
Yeah.
Mainly because it's a time and place type of thing. It's if I'm talking about a movie or something in pop culture, you print it. If you look at my book now, you're like, oh, they're referencing. Remember the last Terminator movie? And you're
Right.
like, oh no, I don't. So.
It does tend to be a snapshot in time, and although you do have archives, there is something about just being able to pick it up and know exactly what they're talking about in that moment and space, and not have to take it to your mom or dad and say, what are they talking about? Which unfortunately happens a lot in my house, especially recently.
So I come from a family of librarians, so I'm always thinking about what is left, like after I'm dead, like what is left to me, is there a print version? And like my final answer is, it always comes down to the particular story, like do I want this to live digitally, is that the best way to tell it, or do I want it to live in posterity? And I guess at the moment I'm sort of more interested in the story as a living thing rather than as an artifact. So I'm more interested in a digital distribution model because it I don't know, something about just having all that feedback live and sort of performing it live just feels more energetic somehow. Like there's something about that feels really living.
And for those of you who've been doing this for a while, how do you, because the internet is so vast, there are so many things out there, how do you get people to come and read about it? Of course, there's word of mouth, there's, promoting it. I know you said, I didn't want to promote it sometimes I didn't even talk about it. So for somebody who's interested and they say, okay, I've got this awesome idea, I want to put it out there, how did you start to draw people in, and how has that changed over time?
I mean, when we started doing it, social media sort of didn't really exist in the form that it does now. So, I mean, like, I feel like if I was doing it now, I'd have so many more tools at my disposal in terms of being able to get the message out there. I think really, like, for us, it was about consistency, not just consistency in putting out the content, but also in sort of, letting people know about where it is. We still did a lot of conventions, even though we didn't really have like a physical book to sell. Just having that presence there and being able to talk to people about it. And,
I think that's a big one, is presence. Making sure you're doing these shows and talking to people. And now with social media, you can set up promotions and stuff. But again, those are hit or miss. I think if you have something decent to say and you keep talking to people about it, they get it, and they tell other people, and it builds. It's just one way to do it.
How hard was it in the beginning when I have a webcomic, like you said, I don't have a physical copy of anything, just to sit at a convention when everyone has their books and try to entice people to come in, like, hey, this is a thing, it's not tangible, but it's a thing and it's super cool, and you guys should totally get into it.
Yeah, I mean, I think having like in my case, for instance, I had other like print books. I had sort of like a diverse table set up. So I think that was part of it also. And I think even like, if you do have a webcomic that you've got, several volumes of and stuff like that, even if you're not doing like chronological collections of stuff, I think it does benefit to have, at least something in print existing. But if not, I mean, like, getting tables at conventions is still relatively easy to do, if you can cover your costs and things like that, and, print up flyers and handouts and stuff like that, or even just, you don't even have to set up at a show. I mean, you can just sort of walk the floor
Oh yeah.
and hand stuff out.
My first show was terrifying.
Where was it?
Long Beach.
Oh, Long Beach Comic Con.
Yeah.
It's a great convention.
Because I didn't have any, like you said, didn't have anything printed, like, of my actual webcomic, just because of the medium at the time. I was like, I didn't print anything. I mean, I had illustrations I've done and prints of other things that I had done. So it was kind of nerve-wracking, saying, well, hey, check out my webcomic. Like, oh, but I like your drawing of, Big Bang Theory. Well, okay, cool. Check out my site. So So,
Yeah, I mean, I can't really, I don't want to offer this as like advice, but you can always just talk with people that you admire in the
Yeah.
industry and say, like, look, I have this thing and you should go and check it out. Here's the URL, and I don't really have anything on me. I have a book to give you, but like, I like your stuff and maybe you like my stuff. And I don't want to tell you to like stalk people, you know.
but do that.
But
Stop
totally,
them.
yeah. But just talk to the people who, I mean, especially at bigger conventions where you've got sort of the more legendary comic creators, like the guys that matter to you, like, go talk to them and say, like, you influenced my stuff, and here is my stuff, and you know, also maybe tweet about it if you really
Yeah.
like it.
For the most part, they're pretty cool. I mean, I've talked to people I admired, so, you know, you get that nervous, like, oh, they're gonna hate me, then you're just like, oh, you know.
I mean, it helps if you're good.
Yeah.
But, I mean.
That's always a plus.
It's always a plus, but like, but you have no way of knowing that also, so.
And then it's whatever they feel is good too. And even, you know, just getting that positive feedback from people, because I've seen it on different floors where people are so encouraging. So it's good to know that. I know that first step, you know, for any of you who have an idea or thinking about, hey, let me put it together, you know, where do you go? Maybe you talk to your closest friends, but when you go and you reach out to that professional, that person who, you know, I go online and I see it, I don't think I've run into anybody who doesn't have 5 minutes to spare to say, hey, you know, this is the way that I did it and this is what I did, so that's great. I think right now maybe it's a little bit easier because you were saying, oh, here's my URL. Everybody has a phone on them, so it's really easy to just say, oh, Google it, here it is. So they can immediately start looking at it like they leaf through a comic book. So in that sense, you're leafing through it, so it's probably,
And
you
it's
know,
a
that's
less
a big
embarrassing
plus.
ask than a selfie.
Yeah.
You be like, hey, rather than spend 30 seconds on a garbage selfie that you don't care about, like check out this website.
And also nowadays with social media, I mean, like, I feel like hashtags on like Twitter and Instagram are like a huge way to get your work out in front of people. Like even the artwork that I'll post from conventions on my Instagram, like if you're very smart about the hashtags that you use, you can actually draw audiences that are very close to the subject matter of like
I'm
things
gonna have
that
to
you're
pick
doing.
your brain about this,
Yeah,
because I use hashtags all the time, and it's they do work. I literally never search for a hashtag before ever, but other people must do it.
Well, the
It
thing
must
is,
actually be
a lot of times, especially on Instagram, when you look through like all the, like when you do your little initial search, now they give you all those thumbnails of things that are related to things that you like. A lot of times they use hashtags.
Videos. I've never looked at a snake video.
Well, but a lot of times they group those things according to the hashtags that you keep finding, like on pieces of artwork and stuff.
It's a science.
So it's,
Yeah,
so
it's
it's invisible searching.
In some ways, yeah. It's sort of basically the social media.
They do some of the
apps,
work
like,
for you.
do the searching for you and,
Yeah.
and then aggregate
That
stuff.
makes so much more sense,
Yeah.
because I imagine like a whole fleet of people out there who only like search for hashtags. I'm like, who
Yeah.
are you? Where do you?
Yeah.
Nobody does that.
I mean,
I see it work.
Yeah, sometimes it
Yeah.
happens. but-
Now on Instagram sometimes they'll say, oh, we see that you search for, you know, snake videos. So why don't you try
Yeah, well, or
alligators videos or something?
even if you like if you like an image that happens to have a certain hashtag, it'll make note of that and give you more stuff that's similar to that.
It's watching you.
Yeah, it's watching you and it's listening to you all the time.
As
And
long
then
as it's
you can
also
take-
promoting you.
Yeah, right.
And then
You might
you
show
can take
up
some
in
of
one of
those
those.
and you can use them for the promotions for the webcomics, I'm imagining. You know, you can see what, you know, some of your fans are following and you can see them and you can put them in the bottom, which is a great way to push it.
Yeah.
What about people who don't have a background? Because you said you had already been in print comics, you were in video games. What about somebody who's starting ground level? What are some of the bits of advice that you could give them? You know, we just ran into a group of kids from a local high school who are printing their own comics and they
Oh,
have
cool.
their own podcast.
That's awesome.
But up Arroyo Valley High School. And it's so great. We bought 2 books. One is, what's the name of the one you got?
A normal day and It's Okay to Be Different.
So So these kids are coming up with these amazing stories, they're putting them together, they're printing them so they could sell them. But those could be great webcomics as well. So, I mean, what kind of advice would you give to these kids who have these ideas?
I mean, really, like, the tools are at your disposal, more so than I think they ever were, you know, when I started. There's a lot of really easy places where you can make websites, even if you're not very proficient in building websites. There's a lot of templates and things that you can use. I mean, really, like, you know, you could, I mean, Instagram could basically be your site for your webcomics.
I transitioned mine to basically Instagram first, and then everything else as secondary. But yeah, to steal a slogan, just do it. Just that was the one, you know, what took me from, you know, not doing it. I'm just gonna put it out there, like you said. I put it on the internet, and you know, like it or not.
Yeah, and what's amazing about webcomics in general, I'd say more than even like print comics, is, you know, the audience for webcomics likes to see an artist evolve. They like to see stories evolve. So even if you don't necessarily feel like you're at a level that that you're sort of comfortable with, like, you know, the fact that you do it like every day or twice a week or things like that, like, you know, I know for me, like, when I find a webcomic that I really enjoy, I'll go right back in the archives to the very first one.
I do the same thing.
And it's always cool to me to see, like, how they drew the characters and how that changes. And there's something really iterative about webcomics that most other comics don't really allow the luxury of for creators. So I think it is really more about just starting from somewhere. And you know, also the fact that your story doesn't have to follow a structure, it doesn't have to, well, sure, but it doesn't have to follow all of the rules, you know, for all of these things. I mean, you could find a different format to tell stories with. I mean, you know, even talking about doing like a webcomic on Instagram, because now you can do multiple images and swipe through them. That's a really great way to do gag strips.
That's my reasoning.
Because because you're set up in the one image, you swipe to reveal the punchline, you know, stuff like that. Like, you could actually, and feel free to take this idea, I'm not going to do anything with it, but the idea of doing like a really cool long-term serialized story on Instagram, you know, sounds really kind of interesting. You know, especially again, because you're using swipes. I mean, you can't trademark a format.
Well, actually, that's a really good branch right there. You can't trademark a format, and I feel like webcomics are at their best when they sort of buck the chains of print, and we think of webcomics, or at least we used to think of webcomics as somehow analogous to print comics.
Digital versions of comics,
You're flipping through pages, and the fact is that none of that format has to translate at all. We could come up with entirely new ways of transitioning, of telling sequential stories that don't necessarily involve, you know, motion comics or animation or anything like that. It's just about format, because freed of a physical medium, you can do anything.
Yeah, your picture space could be any size. I've seen a lot of really cool webcomics that do click-throughs for dialogue and things like that. So not necessarily motion, but you're using the format of the device to great effect.
Use the platform to your advantage.
Yeah.
Discover its strengths and use those. And for young creators or new creators starting out, my advice is like, be freaky and use a non-dip bloom and just go bananas with it. Like, there's no comics code here. There's no gatekeeper. You're gonna find, no matter how small they are, you're gonna find a portion of comics readership who likes your point of view, who likes what you have to say, and thinks that you're interesting. And be interesting, be novel.
It's a good thing, and all three of you brought up the idea of that there is no gatekeeper. And one thing that I keep thinking about is that I see a lot of female webcomic artists, I see a lot of people of color, I see a lot of niche genres that people enjoy that definitely would not make it into Marvel, into DC, either because they're racy or because they're, you know, they just wouldn't make sense. It wouldn't make profitability. sense to print that. How have you seen it evolve in allowing more people, a more diverse set of artists and writers over the years?
I mean, just from my experience with the webcomic creators, I sort of came up with they were sort of ahead of the curve in a lot of those ways, in ways that print and, other media are still just catching up on now. I think webcomics will continue to sort of be that, again, because it's really anybody that has access to the internet or device and has the interest can put a book out, whereas, all these other things you need, all these steps and people and stuff that can give you quote-unquote permission to do those things.
But it's such a big machine, and the outlay of money initially is so high because there's a physical product. I mean, I don't think they're gatekeeping, maybe some, I don't think they're gatekeeping intentionally as a way of keeping people out, but it comes down to a weird bottom line. Yeah. Well, we just don't have 100 million Latinos that are going to read this thing, so it doesn't make sense for us to put that out. Well, in what sense that's not?
Yeah.
That's never gonna come up.
Yeah, and it
if
also,
there are 50 people out there who like this thing,
Right.
it would behoove me to speak to those 50 people if that also happens to be my thing.
yeah, and also if they're coming up with numbers like that, a lot of times what they're saying is in terms of in the traditional way that these things are done, to try and sell like a movie ticket or something like that. But really, those audiences are there. Those numbers those numbers that they throw out that they say aren't there,
I'm also
really technically are, because you can everybody has a phone.
Right.
Worldwide, we have access to all these devices.
And also at this point, with bigger companies making literally billions of dollars off of movies and associated media, I would kind of expect that they would take a little bit more of a Wild West approach to their normal stable of physical media and be like, well, actually, our readership of Avengers comics is like this. Our viewership of Avengers movies is like this, but our readership is like this. We can go totally bananas in here and do stuff that we wouldn't normally allow just because we're making so much off of this other medium. If we make nothing off of the Avengers, who cares?
Yeah.
Why don't we do something interesting?
But I find that when it's profit driven like that, everybody gets very conservative about everything.
Obviously, this is why I'm not in charge.
Yeah. Well, but that's where the webcomics model, or even just honestly doing independent comics in general, is really where it's at. So for example, I've been working in I guess what you would call mainstream comics, or at least comics as they're known, since 2001. I've worked for almost every small press publisher and in varying ways, shapes, and forms. And some of them I always felt like there were things that they should be doing that they weren't. And you get any number of reasons as to why. But in 2010, I self-published my own book, and it was eye-opening for me in terms of having to do all of it by myself. How many things that I was told no one ever does actually worked, because I was just trying them. I was just,
You weren't confined by those quote-unquote rules.
Well, I wasn't confined by the quote-unquote rules, but then also as an independent creator, how little money I actually had to make to actually turn a profit. So, books that I used to work on that the sales were not of a level that, say, a publisher would find, satisfactory. For me, really, I just needed to make enough money that I could continue to put it back into doing more books, And so, I feel like even on the webcomics end, because, there's plenty of ways now to monetize your webcomic. You can sell ad space on your site. You can develop partnerships with products. You can make your own merch and sell it. It really is about finding the thing that works for you, and in a way that a mainstream.
And because you
sort of
don't
media
have an
thing.
entire department of people to support,
Yeah.
it's well, as long as I can make this much.
Yeah. But also that you can literally try anything you want to do. If you think of a cool idea to try and promote your webcomic, you can try it out. And if it doesn't work, so what? If it does work, it's great. And in a lot of ways, you're innovating in a way that like other companies, like if you imagine larger companies as being these sort of like giant elephant-sized creatures.
And completely petrified of the user.
Yeah, but also like their ability to turn, their ability to change direction is
not terribly
is very, very slow. And if you imagine as the sort of independent creator, you're like a little mouse, you know what I mean? It's like, it might take you longer to get to where like, say the elephant would go, but like you can zig and zag, you can maneuver your way through all of those things in a way that they can't. And
all by still moving forward.
yeah, and being nimble in your way of thinking. And you know, I mean, I found all kinds of really cool ways to sort of, as a grassroots way to market your stuff that really doesn't cost anything. It just costs time. You know, and I think that's the benefit of doing it too.
And maybe you can tell us a little bit about that, because working in a mainstream newspaper, believe me, I see the analogy of the elephant and the mouse, where somebody, you know, we get our editor saying, oh, don't worry about this news website, they're not a real threat, and all of a sudden, you know, here's BuzzFeed.
Yeah.
You know, I was working in a time when people were saying, oh, that's just a listicle place. And they still do listicles, but that's what got them known, and now they're doing really great investigative work. So I absolutely understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
But maybe you can share some of those like really cool grassroots things that have worked for you.
I like to imagine you going door to door.
Yeah, with like a tablet. Have you seen
Have you seen my
webcomic?
webcomic?
Well, like for example, like press releases. You guys probably see press releases all the time, like on websites, you know, about like a new movie that's coming out or whatever. You can just write those. Like you know, when I worked for, when I did books with other publishers, I always like wanted like their marketing departments to put those out and stuff like that. And
the words for immediate release.
Yeah.
Are your best release.
And so like for my comics, like I just looked up what the format was. I just sort of like looked up a handful of press releases and sort of looked at how they were all broken down. And I just wrote my own press releases, and then I found websites that were, you know, applicable to like the book I was doing, and I just sent stuff to them.
Yeah.
Maybe about half of them ran it, but most websites that carry any kind of news about like pop culture or anything, they have to run stuff every day.
Right.
So if you send them a press release promoting your stuff, doesn't matter who you are, like they'll run it. Like you know, because they have to put content up. It's not like you called up the newspaper and wanted to run something in the newspaper, or you wanted like a commercial on television or something. It's like a 24-hour news website is looking for content.
They are as hungry for you as you are desperate for them.
Yeah, and the fact that you went and did most of the work in terms of giving them all the important information, which is like who you are,
that's the important.
what's your book.
Make sure that they don't have to do anything except hits.
You're hitting all the questions.
Yeah. But like why your story? You know what I mean? If your webcomic or your comic idea has a certain theme, or it's about certain kinds of characters that you feel like are underrepresented, or anything that makes the story notable, it's like you can put that right in there, you know.
And I have to say, as a reporter, that's really important, because we do get a lot of press releases, and a lot of it is just, here's a book. Awesome.
Yeah.
You know, I don't have time to call back your publisher to find out, well, what's it about, what's this? If you can get out of their why it's novel. You know, why people should care, that's a big thing, is letting people know why they should care, because people have to read what's on there. It's not just about, we need content, but we need content people will definitely want to come back for. So that's, yay, thank you.
But also, what's really cool about that too, and this was an unintended side effect of the books I worked on, was because I had sent out the press release to those sites that I had specifically went to, there are tons of aggregate news sites too.
That's right.
So these aren't the main sites that carry the news articles. They're the sites that feed off of those sites to post articles. So that ended up driving a lot of traffic to my site, were people that found it through those aggregate sites. So basically, like by just creating one press release and say sending it out to like 5 sites, those 5 sites turn into 15. Was 15 turned into 20.
Yeah.
And did you see, I mean, did you just do it at the start, or did you do them sort of throughout the?
For this, it was a print comic that I had done, but I also had digital copies for sale on the website, and then I was also selling them through like a PayPal store. And this, like when I say my site, I really used Blogger, and I built like a blog site, and then I got a domain name that tied to it. And so this was real like bare bones stuff. But I also could track the analytics, so I knew where everybody was coming
And so
from.
you saw a bump.
I saw a huge bump. Like from the time that I sent the press release out that week was the biggest spike I had. And again, this was just sort of me experimenting. And it's also something that I recognized that like if I was regularly doing that, then I'd be able to sort of keep those spikes going. But that's the nice thing too, is all these sites that you can make websites on, you can also track your traffic. So you'll be able to know places that you promoted, you know, and sort of which ones work the best for you, or sort of where things came from. And the cool thing is you'll be surprised where you'll get noticed from, you know. You might track it all back to like one blog or something. Yeah.
It is a bit nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
When you like, put out a promotion and
Sure.
like you check your analytics and you're like, one hit, you're like,
Yeah.
okay, that didn't work, but
Yeah.
like you're saying, it's kind of like trial and error, just kind of put it out there.
Yeah. But also you can keep trying the same things over and over again. You'll get different results every time because you never know exactly like whether or not a keyword that's part of your article hits at a certain time, or something else blows up on the internet that tangentially could tie to whatever it is you're doing.
You never know what it is. You may put it out at a time, this has happened to us, where you put out a story and you're like, yeah, this is gonna be a great story, everyone's gonna wanna read it, but then something happens on the other side of the world that just draws all the attention away.
Yeah.
So then you're like, let me try to re-social it again, let me send it out there again. So it's just the consistency of being out there and being in front of people.
But I would also say to anybody that's trying to get a comic going, or a webcomic, specifically a webcomic, I would say it's not necessarily about the results. So it really is about the journey and not the destination. I think if you have a story that you want to tell, the joy should come in the telling of the story, of the making of the story. I know we just talked a lot about getting responses and getting hits and getting all that stuff, but really ultimately, like the stuff you're gonna live with every day is the work that you're putting into it. So while you are tracking those results and while you are maybe trying to be quote unquote a success, you know, just recognize that's different for everybody.
Yeah, I feel like
You know?
we missed an opportunity to sort of define success at the beginning.
Right,
of this,
yeah.
Because if you define success by the number of hits that you get, or the amount of merch that you're able to sell, or how long you do a con, I mean, all of these are different measuring sticks.
Yeah.
And if your measuring stick for success is really personal, and it's like, well, I'm able to tell the story that I want to tell, I'm growing as an artist, I'm growing as a storyteller, I'm talking to 50 people who like what I do
Yeah.
on a really intimate scale. If that's your measurement for success, it's imminently achievable. Like,
Yeah.
it's a very direct route to success. Do what you want to do, you'll find people who want to do it.
And what is your measuring stick? Have you reached your measuring stick? Does it continue to change for each of you?
Always changing.
Yeah, I would say that constantly.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I first started in comics in general, the measurement of success was get into comics, you know? And then you sort of,
A comic.
yeah, make a comic, and then you sort of, you know, I think for me it was like when I first saw that first book I did in print was, all right, success number 2, make a better comic.
Make something I'm not totally sure.
Yeah, I think for me initially the benchmark was to try and get my work to a level that looked like a lot of stuff I liked, or the stuff that I saw.
Emulating people.
Yeah, in a way, like a level of polish or a level of, you know, proficiency. But a lot of that has changed. I mean, I think the trajectory of my career personally was, you know, I had that sort of track I had, which was like, oh, I want to, I don't know, drop a Marvel Comics or something like that. And, you know, the ups and downs that sort of happen in a career like that, it did evolve. I mean, eventually it got me back to sort of almost where I started, which was the goal, you know, being more so now that, you know, I work more in animation during the day, is like, now I sort of have the freedom to tell the stories I want to tell. And I think that's the new sort of measurement of success, or the new goal, is to just tell more of my own stories, things that I own, because I've already done all that sort of freelance type work, working for other people, and you know, sort of achieving their visions, you know, which is something I still find fulfilling. But for me, like, you know, being able to tell stories in format and the way that I want to tell them, that's sort of the bigger thing.
Now, we've got a few minutes left, so if anyone has any questions, we can open up the floor. I'm sure we could hear you if you just speak up loudly. Anyone?
Have you guys used any webcomic apps like Webtoons to publish new materials, or considered it?
I've looked into it. It didn't go much further than that. I just kind of like saw the app online. I think, is it one, I think you have to like submit to them. I'm not sure exactly how the process goes. I think it's, if you have an idea, you submit it to them, and then they say yes or no, and then they'll kind of put out
Tell us more
your
about
book, your strip, yeah.
And I know that a lot of, not all of them, but there's been a few that I read on there that have started to incorporate music and sound effects that are triggered once you scroll to a certain
that's cool.
panel.
Yeah.
Because they're not comics like that. It's not like a page turn, it's more of like a scroll, so that affects the paneling and everything too. But they're starting to incorporate GIFs for like horror webtoons. Are starting to do like
Jump
you get to a
scare.
certain
That's
panel. Yeah,
Yeah.
and they have like boom, 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 boom footsteps like coming down the hallway, or the blood will start to ooze a little bit. They're just GIFs that will play, but I think it's been adding to the experience for certain ones.
Yeah.
It sounds tacky, but no, but it could be awesome. Like you could do something cool with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the idea of having them as a jump scare when you said that, and I was
Yeah.
like, oh, that totally makes sense.
Like I would do that
Cool.
once. Like that.
Yeah,
now
waiting for it
it's
forever.
insert,
It never happens
20
again.
issues later,
Yeah.
like, God, he's gonna do it again.
Anyone else?
I'm curious, when you put your art out there, you know, you obviously make it for yourself and tell the story you want to tell, and then you're talking about getting your analytics and things. Do you change your strategy based on that? Like, if you say, oh, my audience really loves Instagram, so I'm going to put more stuff on Instagram. Do you contextualize the way you put things out based on this feedback you get?
I mean, I think it depends on what you do. I mean, yours
Yeah,
is more pop culture based.
I
so-
definitely did that. Mine started, I just had my own like website where I would post the artwork, and like we were talking about earlier, mine I have a lot of gag panels, so it's like, you know, panel 1, panel 2, joke. And when you go to my website, you see it all at once, you're like, okay, great. I noticed that, you know, once Instagram started doing the multiple page, I could get my punchlines out, you know, on panel 3. You know, it's scroll, there it is. You know, you don't get it ahead of time. So I definitely, you know, went that route just for that purpose.
Yeah, I think for me it's more like, I don't think those kind of things necessarily dictate, you know, where you go with something. But again, it depends on what it is you're doing. So if you have a set story in mind, I think really it's more useful information. So for example, like we were saying, in terms of if you can track where a lot of your traffic's coming from, then maybe those are sites you might reach out to do interviews, or to see if they would maybe feature your comic on their site, you know, do some kind of partnership or things like that. You know, there's all different kind of ways to interpret that information, and it's more about like how it applies to what you're doing.
And never content. Like I don't think I would ever change the direction the story was going. If I got an inkling that the fan base was more interested in one character, or I don't feel like I would
Yeah.
sort of like that.
I don't think I would do that either.
Maybe I would.
Yeah. It seems like in your instance, you sort of curated the amount of interaction the audience was gonna have with your story
Well,
by
it's also-
giving them the sort of A/B.
So I mentioned earlier, like occasionally I was thrown for a loop when people would go for a choice that I didn't think many people would go for. So I also did a lot of test runs at my game studio, where I would make people go through the entire story in written form, and I had a whole app set up, and I had my idea in my head of sort of the map of the story and where it would go, and the actual numbers were completely different. They were all over the place, and so I would see every single person to a man make the exact same decision, contrary to what I thought people would make, and it blew my mind. And it didn't. I never changed the story as a result of it, but it did help me reframe my questions, and it made me think, okay, well, this is sort of interesting because the context of the question, the way that I word the question, is I don't want to say poisoning the well, but you're giving people sort of too much information when every single person is like, oh no, I'm definitely going for choice B. You know that you've loaded your question wrong. So there was a little bit of that. There was a little bit of sort of massaging the wording and the context of the questions, but never the content itself. Just how I was slipping into information.
Anyone else? We should be breaking out of here in a few minutes, so if you wanted to let everyone know where they can find you, if they want to meet you afterwards, what table you're at.
I'm in Artist Alley, G6.
Artist Alley, J2.
I want to say D. I'm definitely in D somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, we all have banners with our names on
Yeah.
them, right? So if you're in the general area.
Just follow me to the table. If you just, it's not that big, just wander.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. I'm sure that everyone learned a lot about webcomics and your personal journeys through it, and it was a lot of fun. So thank you guys for coming out. And yeah,